Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Move back, please. Keep the area clear. Mr. Jenkins, over here. Mr. Jenkins. I recognize you.
The man stepping out of the private jet wasn't just another billionaire arriving in New York. To the thousands of people gathered outside one of Manhattan's most prestigious charity galas, he was a symbol of extraordinary success. Cameras flashed from every direction. Luxury vehicles stretched along the entrance. Security officers held back reporters eager to capture a single photograph. Then, through the crowd, one journalist quietly whispered, "That's Jason Brooks, the billionaire nobody saw coming." At that exact moment, another man standing only a few feet away stopped walking. Jayden Brooks stared across the red carpet, unable to believe what he was seeing. 5 years earlier, he had watched his older brother walk away with nothing more than a worn suitcase and a broken heart. Everyone believed Jason's story had ended the day he disappeared. Instead, somehow, the brother who had vanished without a job, without money, and without a future had returned as one of America's fastest rising business leaders. The applause surrounding Jason echoed through the grand entrance, but neither brother seemed to hear it. They saw only each other. Years of unanswered questions hung silently between them. Then Jason finally looked directly into Jayden's eyes. For a brief moment, it seemed as though time itself had stopped. Would he finally explain why he disappeared? Would Jayden discover the truth that had haunted him for years? Or had the distance between them grown too great to ever be repaired? Without saying a single word, Jason calmly walked past his younger brother and disappeared inside the ballroom, leaving reporters, guests, and Jayden himself searching for answers. Nobody watching that moment realized they were witnessing the beginning of a story that stretched back years before the luxury, before the headlines, and before billions of dollars changed both brothers' lives forever. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 5 years earlier, Jason Brooks wasn't stepping off private jets or attending exclusive charity galas. He was sitting quietly at the back of a long-distance bus with everything he owned packed inside a single worn suitcase. Beside him sat the only person who had refused to abandon him when his entire world fell apart: his girlfriend, Maria. Behind them lay a broken family, shattered trust, and a promise between two brothers that now seemed impossible to keep. Ahead of them was a city they had never seen, no guarantee of work, and no certainty that tomorrow would be any better than yesterday. Yet hidden inside that uncertain journey was a meeting so unexpected that it would transform Jason's future in ways neither he nor anyone else could have imagined. The question wasn't simply how a struggling man became a billionaire. The real mystery was why. After achieving everything he once dreamed of, he returned without ever telling his own brother the truth about the betrayal that changed both of their lives. And as remarkable as Jason's rise would become, someone else had been quietly protecting a secret that could destroy everything if it ever came to light. The story you're about to hear isn't only about wealth or success. It's about loyalty, sacrifice, family, and the heavy price people sometimes pay for keeping the truth buried for far too long. As the ballroom doors closed behind Jason Brooks, the questions only became more difficult to ignore. The guests inside saw an accomplished billionaire whose companies had reshaped industries and whose generosity had earned admiration across the country. The reporters outside saw another inspiring success story worthy of tomorrow's headlines. But Jayden Brooks saw something entirely different. He saw the older brother who had once shared a cramped apartment with him, skipped meals so he could have enough to eat, and walked away without defending himself when accusations tore their family apart. Standing there in stunned silence, Jayden couldn't understand how the man he believed had lost everything had returned with a fortune beyond imagination. Yet that was only the first mystery. Somewhere between leaving with one worn suitcase and arriving in New York aboard a private jet, someone had opened a door that changed Jason's life forever. Who believed in a man the world had already written off? Who saw potential when everyone else saw failure? The answer would eventually surprise everyone, because it wasn't built on luck, inheritance, or coincidence. It began with a decision so ordinary that almost no one noticed it at the time. But another question had quietly followed Jayden for years, one he had never answered even to the people closest to him. Jayden still believed his brother had abandoned the family out of jealousy and wounded pride. He had no idea that Jayden had spent years protecting him from a truth that could have destroyed his happiness in a single conversation. Clara had entered their lives appearing supportive, thoughtful, and devoted. Yet after Jayden disappeared, her name became something he refused to speak aloud. Even after building an empire, even after earning more wealth than either brother had ever imagined as children, Jayden never exposed what had really happened inside that apartment. He never told Jayden about the private conversations, the quiet manipulation, or the painful choice that forced him to leave without defending his own name. Why would a man sacrifice his own reputation to protect someone who no longer trusted him? Was it loyalty? Was it guilt? Or was Jayden carrying a burden he believed was too painful for his younger brother to bear? Then came the mystery that puzzled almost everyone who followed Jayden's remarkable rise. Success gave him every opportunity to return. He had the resources, the influence, and the freedom to reconnect with the only family he had left. Yet year after year, he stayed away. He never called. He never appeared at family gatherings. He never corrected the stories people believed about him. From the outside, it looked as though he had erased his past completely. But was that really the truth? Or was Jayden quietly waiting for the right moment, believing that returning too soon would only reopen wounds that had never truly healed? Sometimes the hardest decision isn't walking away. Sometimes it's knowing when to come back. And for Jayden Brooks, that decision would shape not only his future, but also the future of the brother who still had no idea how deeply his own life had been manipulated. Because the answers to these three questions are connected in ways no one could have imagined. Who transformed a struggling man into one of America's most respected billionaires? Why did Jayden remain silent about Clara even after he had nothing left to lose? And if his greatest dream had always been to rebuild the bond he once shared with Jayden, why did he wait until that unforgettable night in New York to finally stand in front of his brother again? To understand those answers, we have to return to the morning Jayden boarded that bus believing he had reached the lowest point of his life, completely unaware that destiny had already begun arranging a future greater than anything he had ever dared to imagine. Long before anyone called Jayden Brooks a billionaire, there was a time when simply making it through another week felt like a victory. The headlines celebrated the empire he would eventually build, but they could never capture the quiet sacrifices that shaped the man standing beneath those flashing cameras in New York. To understand why Jayden remained silent for so many years, you first have to understand the promise that once meant more to him than wealth, success, or recognition. It was a promise made between two young brothers who believed nothing in the world could ever separate them. Looking back now, it's difficult to imagine that a bond built through years of hardship could be undone by a handful of decisions that seemed insignificant at the time. Yet that's exactly what happened. Jayden and Jayden Brooks grew up in a tiny apartment where every dollar mattered. Their mother, Evelyn Brooks, worked exhausting shifts as a nursing assistant, leaving before sunrise and often returning home long after dark, determined to provide a better future for her sons. Life was never easy. Some nights one meal had to last until the following morning. Their clothes were carefully repaired instead of replaced, and every small blessing was treated with gratitude. Even during those difficult years, Evelyn constantly reminded her boys that integrity was something no amount of money could ever buy. Jayden embraced those words with all his heart. As the older brother, he quietly accepted responsibilities no child should have to carry, always making sure Jayden felt protected, even when he himself felt uncertain about the future. Together they endured the embarrassment of being mocked at school because of their poverty. Together they walked miles each day carrying worn backpacks that had been stitched together more times than they could count. And one evening, after another painful day of humiliation, they sat outside their school as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon and made a promise that would shape both of their lives. One day, they would become successful together, and no one would ever make them feel small again. Years later, that promise seemed closer than ever when both brothers earned admission into college. It was there that Jayden met Maria, the woman whose kindness, loyalty, and unwavering belief in him gave him hope during some of the most uncertain years of his life. Their relationship grew naturally, built on honesty, shared dreams, and the determination to create a future neither of them had ever been given. Around the same time, another student entered their lives. Her name was Clara. At first, she appeared friendly, thoughtful, and easy to trust. Jayden treated her with the same kindness he showed everyone else, never imagining that she had begun developing feelings he could never return. When Clara eventually confessed how she felt, Jayden gently turned her down, making it clear that his heart already belonged to Maria. He believed the conversation had ended with respect. He couldn't have been more mistaken. Months later, Jayden proudly introduced Clara as the woman he had fallen in love with. Jayden chose to keep their earlier conversation to himself, believing it would only create unnecessary conflict and trusting that Clara had moved forward. Instead, silence became the very thing that allowed misunderstanding to grow. Over time, Clara quietly inserted herself between the brothers. She planted doubts so carefully that they barely seemed noticeable at first. Small comments became larger suspicions. Ordinary disagreements slowly became painful arguments. Jayden, without realizing it, began seeing his older brother through someone else's words instead of his own experiences. Maria noticed the change long before Jayden was willing to admit it. She pleaded with him to tell Jayden the truth, convinced honesty could still save their family. But Jayden refused. He believed protecting his younger brother's happiness was more important than protecting his own reputation. Eventually, the weight of those lies became too heavy to carry. Accused of jealousy, betrayal, and taking advantage of the brother he had spent his entire life protecting, Jayden made the most painful decision he had ever faced. Without exposing Clara, without defending himself, and without asking anyone to believe his side of the story, he quietly packed everything he owned into a single worn suitcase. Maria never hesitated. She chose to leave with him, believing that a future built on honesty was worth more than comfort built on deception. As the apartment door closed behind them, Jayden thought he had lost everything. But what he didn't know was that the next person he was about to meet would completely rewrite his future. Sometimes the moment that changes an entire life doesn't arrive with applause, headlines, or celebration. Sometimes it begins on an ordinary morning when a person has already convinced himself that every opportunity has disappeared. As Jayden Brooks stepped off the bus carrying the same worn suitcase that now held everything he owned, he wasn't searching for wealth. He wasn't expecting success. He was simply trying to survive another day. The city around him was alive with people rushing to work, taxis weaving through traffic, and strangers focused on their own lives. To everyone else, Jayden was just another man starting over with very little. Yet within the next few hours, one unexpected decision would place him in front of someone whose influence would reshape his future forever. The remarkable part is that Jayden never went looking for that opportunity. It found him because he chose character over convenience at the exact moment no one appeared to be watching. After leaving the bus station with Maria, the couple spent hours walking through unfamiliar streets, searching for affordable places to stay and businesses that might be hiring. Every help wanted sign represented another chance to begin again, but every polite rejection reminded Jayden how difficult it was to start from nothing in a city where nobody knew his name. Their savings were disappearing faster than either of them wanted to admit. Even so, Jayden refused to complain. Maria noticed the exhaustion in his face, but also recognized the quiet determination that had carried him through every hardship since childhood. She reminded him that losing one chapter didn't mean his entire story was over. Jayden smiled, thanked her for believing in him, and promised he would keep moving forward no matter how many doors closed in front of him. Late that afternoon, while crossing a busy downtown intersection, Jayden noticed an elderly gentleman struggling with several important documents that had scattered across the sidewalk after a strong gust of wind. Pedestrians hurried past without stopping, too busy with their own schedules to notice. Jayden immediately placed his suitcase on the ground and rushed forward. Together with Maria, he carefully gathered every document before traffic or the wind could carry them away. As Jayden handed the neatly organized folder back to the elderly man, he expected nothing more than a simple thank you. Instead, the gentleman looked at him with unusual curiosity. Rather than immediately leaving, he asked Jayden where he was from, what had brought him to the city, and why someone with his education and professionalism was carrying his entire life inside a single suitcase. Jayden answered honestly. He spoke about losing his job opportunities, leaving behind painful memories, and refusing to blame anyone else for the circumstances that had brought him there. He never mentioned billions, revenge, or proving anyone wrong. He simply admitted that he wanted one fair opportunity to rebuild his life through hard work. The elderly gentleman listened without interrupting. His questions became more thoughtful with every passing minute. Instead of asking about Jayden's resume, he asked something far more unusual. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what does loyalty mean to you when the people you love stop believing in you?" Jayden paused before answering. He explained that loyalty wasn't something you practiced only when life was easy. Sometimes loyalty meant protecting someone even when they misunderstood your intentions. The gentleman nodded thoughtfully before asking another question. "If you failed over and over again, how would you know when it was finally time to quit?" Jayden looked down briefly before responding with complete honesty. "The day I stopped believing that integrity matters more than success, that's the day I quit." The answer seemed to leave a lasting impression. A few moments later, the elderly man reached into his jacket pocket and handed Jayden an elegant business card embossed with the name of one of the most respected companies in the region. He invited Jayden and Maria to visit his office the following morning. Jayden assumed it was simply another job interview, another opportunity among dozens that might lead nowhere. What he didn't realize was that this wasn't an interview for employment at all. Every question the elderly businessman had asked, every answer Jayden had given, and every decision he had made since stepping off that bus was quietly becoming part of a much larger evaluation. Long before Jayden walked into that executive office the next morning, someone had already begun deciding whether he possessed qualities that couldn't be measured by a resume, a college degree, or years of experience. And Jayden was about to discover that the meeting waiting for him would challenge far more than his professional abilities. Jayden Brooks walked into the company's headquarters believing he had finally reached the interview that could change his life. The polished marble floors, towering glass walls, and quiet confidence of the executives moving through the building reminded him just how far he was from the life he had once imagined. He straightened his jacket, took a slow breath, and promised himself that no matter what happened inside those walls, he would leave knowing he had stayed true to the values his mother had taught him. What Jayden didn't know was that there would be no ordinary interview waiting for him that morning. The questions had already begun long before he stepped into the building, and the answers the elderly businessman was searching for couldn't be found on a resume or in a list of professional achievements. He wanted to discover something far more valuable, who Jayden really was when nobody seemed to be paying attention. The receptionist welcomed Jayden warmly and asked him to wait in the executive lounge for a few moments. Maria remained downstairs in the lobby, encouraging him with a reassuring smile before he disappeared behind the elevator doors. The waiting area was quiet, overlooking the city's skyline through enormous glass windows. Several executives walked in and out carrying folders, coffee cups, and briefcases, each focused on the demands of another busy workday. Jayden quietly reviewed the notes inside his portfolio, hoping to make the best impression possible. A few minutes later, one sharply dressed executive hurried through the lounge while answering a phone call. As he reached the doorway, a thick leather wallet slipped unnoticed from his coat pocket and landed beside one of the chairs. The man continued walking without ever looking back. Jayden glanced toward the hallway, then down at the wallet. Picking it up, he immediately realized it contained thousands of dollars in cash, several premium credit cards, and personal identification. For someone who had recently struggled to afford a place to sleep, the money could have solved many immediate problems. Rent, food, transportation, and dozens of unanswered worries suddenly seemed only one decision away. Yet Jayden never hesitated. He walked directly to the reception desk and asked if someone could help locate the wallet's owner before he even looked inside to see whose name it carried. The receptionist thanked him, contacted the executive, and within minutes the grateful man returned, expressing sincere appreciation for Jayden's honesty. Jayden simply smiled and explained that returning something which didn't belong to him was never a decision that required thinking about. The executive shook his hand before disappearing once again into the building. Jayden believed the incident was over. He had no reason to suspect that somewhere else inside the headquarters, Several people had quietly taken notice. The elderly businessman said nothing when they finally met. Instead, their conversation continued as though nothing unusual had happened that morning. They spoke about Jason's education, his ambitions, and the lessons hardship had taught him. The businessman remained calm, thoughtful, and difficult to read, revealing almost nothing about what he truly thought of the young man sitting across from him. Just as Jason began believing the meeting was going well, another unexpected challenge appeared. Later that afternoon, while completing a simple administrative task requested by one of the department managers, an expensive presentation prepared for an important client suddenly disappeared from the company's internal system. Confusion quickly spread throughout the office. Deadlines were approaching, senior executives demanded answers, and before long one employee confidently suggested that Jason must have made a costly mistake while handling the files. The room fell silent as several people turned toward the newest face in the office. It would have been easy for Jason to defend himself by pointing toward another employee whose actions had actually caused the problem. He had noticed the error earlier, but chose not to embarrass anyone publicly. Instead, Jason calmly accepted responsibility for helping resolve the situation, working alongside the rest of the team until every document was successfully recovered. Even after the true cause of the mistake became clear, he refused to mention the colleague whose oversight had nearly created a major financial loss for the company. Some people questioned why he remained silent. Others assumed he lacked confidence. Only Jason understood that protecting another person's dignity sometimes mattered more than proving himself right. As Jason left the office that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that the day had been unusual. The questions, the unexpected incidents, and the reactions of the people around him didn't feel like ordinary workplace experiences. Still, he dismissed the thought and focused on preparing for whatever came next. What he didn't know was that every moment of that day had been carefully observed from another part of the building. Hidden security cameras had captured his decision to return the wallet without hesitation. Senior executives had quietly reported how he handled the missing presentation without shifting blame onto anyone else. While Jason believed he was simply trying to earn an honest job, someone inside that company was beginning to see qualities that couldn't be taught in any classroom. The elderly businessman hadn't been searching for the smartest applicant or the most experienced employee. He had been searching for something much rarer, and Jason Brooks was about to discover that his greatest opportunity was still waiting just beyond the next door. While Jason Brooks was slowly rebuilding his future one decision at a time, another story was unfolding hundreds of miles away. It was a story built on silence, unanswered questions, and a secret that had never truly disappeared. Most people believed Jason had walked away forever. They assumed the chapter had ended the day he left with a single worn suitcase and never looked back. But the truth has a way of resurfacing when people become convinced it has been buried. Sometimes all it takes is one unexpected conversation, one familiar name spoken at the wrong moment, for carefully hidden fears to return without warning. For Clara, that moment arrived on what should have been an ordinary afternoon, and from that day forward, the confidence she had carried for years quietly began to fade. Life had settled into a comfortable routine for Jayden Brooks. His career was progressing. His relationship with Clara appeared stronger than ever, and although thoughts of his older brother occasionally crossed his mind, he convinced himself that Jason had chosen his own path. Clara encouraged that belief without ever saying it directly. Whenever Jason's name came up, she gently redirected the conversation or reminded Jayden that some people simply weren't meant to remain in each other's lives forever. Over time, Jayden stopped asking questions. He buried his disappointment beneath work, future plans, and the life he believed he was building. Clara quietly welcomed the distance. As long as Jason remained far away, she believed the past could never return to challenge the version of events she had spent years allowing Jayden to believe. Everything changed during a business networking luncheon attended by several executives from different companies. Clara wasn't paying much attention until she overheard two senior professionals discussing an impressive young man who had recently earned the trust of one of the country's most respected business leaders. One of them casually mentioned a name that immediately caused her heart to race. Jason Brooks, he said. That young man has become one of the most promising professionals we've seen in years. If he keeps going at this pace, he'll be leading major projects before long. Clara remained perfectly composed on the outside, But inside, panic replaced certainty. She had spent years believing Jayden had disappeared into a life of struggle. Hearing his name connected to someone so influential made her realize that assumption might have been dangerously wrong. Unable to ignore what she had heard, Clara quietly began searching for answers on her own. She contacted mutual acquaintances without mentioning Jayden directly, searched public business announcements, and followed every small clue she could find. The more she uncovered, the more unsettled she became. Jayden wasn't only alive. He was working closely with one of America's most respected businessmen, a mentor whose reputation for identifying exceptional talent was admired throughout the corporate world. Suddenly, the man she had believed was gone forever was building a future far greater than she had imagined. Yet instead of sharing this discovery with Jayden, Clara chose silence once again. She deleted messages, avoided conversations, and carefully concealed every piece of information she found. It wasn't Jayden's success that frightened her most. It was the possibility that one day he might return, stand face to face with Jayden, and finally tell the truth she had spent years trying to keep hidden. At that moment, Clara understood something she had never considered before. Jayden Brooks was no longer the struggling brother who quietly walked away. He was becoming someone whose voice people would listen to. And if that day ever came, the carefully protected life she had built could begin falling apart in ways she could no longer control. Success rarely arrives in a single dramatic moment. More often, it is built quietly through countless ordinary days that nobody celebrates and almost nobody notices. When people later looked at Jayden Brooks and wondered how he had become one of America's most respected business leaders, they imagined one lucky break, one powerful connection, or one extraordinary opportunity. What they never saw were the years of discipline that came before the headlines. They never saw the nights when Jayden was the last person to leave the office, the weekends he willingly gave up to keep learning, or the sacrifices he and Maria continued making long after life had finally become comfortable. The world would eventually admire the destination, but very few people ever understood the road that led him there. The elderly businessman kept his promise and gave Jayden an opportunity, but it wasn't a shortcut to success. Jayden began at the bottom like everyone else, expected to prove himself every single day. He studied every department, asked thoughtful questions, and volunteered for assignments that others avoided because they required long hours and carried enormous responsibility. Instead of trying to impress people with confidence, Jayden focused on earning trust through consistency. He listened more than he spoke, admitted when he didn't know something, and treated everyone with the same respect, whether they were senior executives or maintenance staff. Slowly, people around the company began noticing something different about the young man who had arrived carrying nothing more than a worn suitcase. He wasn't chasing recognition. He was building a reputation. Months quietly turned into years. Every challenge became another lesson. Every setback strengthened his judgment. The elderly businessman began inviting Jayden into meetings that few young professionals were ever allowed to attend. At first, Jayden simply observed, taking notes and absorbing every discussion about leadership, negotiation, investment, and long-term decision-making. Eventually, his mentor started asking for Jayden's opinion. Those opinions were thoughtful, honest, and always focused on what would benefit the company rather than what would benefit Jayden personally. Time after time, his recommendations proved remarkably accurate. The businessman realized he wasn't simply mentoring an ambitious employee. He was watching a future leader develop right in front of him. Maria remained beside Jayden through every stage of that journey. While others admired the growing success, she remembered the difficult days when they counted every dollar and questioned whether they would ever find stability again. She celebrated every small victory because she understood what it had cost to achieve it. Whenever Jayden doubted himself after difficult projects or demanding business trips, Maria reminded him that success wasn't changing who he was. It was simply giving the world an opportunity to see the character he had always possessed. Her encouragement became one of the greatest sources of strength in his life, and Jayden never forgot that every milestone they reached had been built together. As the years passed, the relationship between Jayden and the elderly businessman grew far beyond business. Important conversations no longer ended when the office closed. They continued over dinner, during long flights to meet clients across the country, and while visiting new investment opportunities in different cities. The businessman spoke openly about his own failures, the painful decisions that had shaped his career, and the responsibility that came with leading thousands of employees whose families depended on wise leadership. Jayden listened carefully, recognizing that he wasn't only learning how to build a successful company, he was learning how to build a meaningful legacy. Gradually, the businessman began introducing Jayden to influential investors, trusted friends, and respected business leaders, not as a promising employee, but as someone whose judgment he valued deeply. It became increasingly clear that Jayden occupied a place no one else in the company had earned. Then, one quiet afternoon, everything changed. The elderly businessman invited Jayden into his private office, closed the door, and placed a thick folder on the desk between them. Jayden assumed it contained another assignment or perhaps plans for an upcoming expansion. Instead, the businessman looked at him with the same calm expression he had worn the day they first met and said something Jayden never expected to hear. He wasn't offering another promotion. He wasn't increasing Jayden's salary. He was inviting him to become a partner. It was an opportunity that had never been offered to anyone outside the founder's own family. In that single moment, Jayden realized that the greatest reward for years of honesty, loyalty, and unwavering integrity wasn't simply financial success. It was the complete trust of a man who had spent a lifetime searching for someone worthy of carrying his legacy into the future. While Jayden Brooks was quietly building a future no one believed possible, another transformation was taking place hundreds of miles away. On the surface, Jayden Brooks had achieved everything he and his older brother once dreamed about as children. He had a successful career, financial stability, a beautiful home, and a woman who appeared completely devoted to him. Anyone looking from the outside would have assumed that Jayden had finally found the life they both promised each other years earlier while sitting outside their old school. Yet success has a strange way of revealing the things money can never replace. Some victories are incomplete, no matter how impressive they appear, and deep inside Jayden, there was a space that promotions, expensive possessions, and public admiration could never quite fill. It was the absence of the one person who had shared every dream with him from the very beginning. As the years passed, Jayden's professional reputation continued growing. His dedication earned him promotion after promotion, placing him among respected executives within his company. He and Clara moved into a luxurious apartment overlooking the city's skyline, a place that reflected the success they had worked so hard to achieve. Their weekends became filled with business dinners, networking events, and conversations about investments, property, and future ambitions. Friends often described them as the perfect couple, believing they represented everything young professionals hoped to become. Plans for an elegant engagement celebration slowly began taking shape, and every milestone seemed to confirm that Jayden's life was moving exactly as he had imagined. Yet despite everything he had gained, certain moments continued to catch him by surprise. Sometimes it happened while driving past places he and Jayden had visited years earlier. Sometimes it happened when he accomplished something important at work and instinctively reached for his phone before remembering there was no one to call. On other occasions, he would hear two brothers laughing together in a restaurant or watch an older brother encouraging a younger sibling, and without realizing it, memories he had tried to bury quietly resurfaced. He remembered Jayden helping him study for difficult college exams, defending him when classmates mocked their family's financial struggles, and working extra hours simply to make sure Jayden never had to give up on his dreams. Those memories refused to disappear, no matter how firmly he convinced himself that the past belonged behind him. Jayden never spoke openly about those thoughts. Pride made silence easier than admitting he still wondered whether everything that happened between them had been unavoidable. Whenever someone casually mentioned family, he quickly changed the subject. Whenever his mother, Evelyn Brooks, gently asked whether he had heard anything about Jayden, Jayden simply shook his head and forced a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He had spent years telling himself that Jayden had chosen to leave. Repeating that belief often enough made it easier to live with the pain, even if a small part of him quietly questioned whether he had truly known the whole story. No one noticed those quiet moments more than Clara. She watched the way Jayden occasionally stared at old family photographs a little longer than usual before placing them back inside a drawer. She noticed the hesitation in his voice whenever Jayden's name unexpectedly came up in conversation. She recognized that despite everything they had built together, there remained one chapter of Jayden's life that had never fully closed. That realization unsettled her far more than she was willing to admit. Clara understood something Jayden himself had not yet accepted. If Jason ever returned and the brothers found themselves standing face to face again, old questions would inevitably demand answers. And if those answers finally came, the carefully constructed version of the past that had shaped Jayden's decisions for years could begin unraveling piece by piece. As Jayden quietly carried the weight of missing the brother he believed had abandoned him, Clara carried a very different burden. The growing fear that the truth she had worked so hard to keep hidden was moving closer with every passing day. There are moments in life when years of quiet sacrifice finally reveal their purpose. For Jason Brooks, that moment arrived without warning. It wasn't announced at a press conference or celebrated with headlines. It happened behind the closed doors of an executive office where one remarkable decision would forever change the course of his life. The young man who had once stepped off a bus carrying a single worn suitcase was about to receive something far more valuable than wealth. He was about to receive complete trust. And that trust would become the foundation of one of the most extraordinary business success stories in America. After decades of building one of the country's most respected companies, the elderly businessman made a decision that stunned his board of directors. Many expected him to sell the company to a larger corporation or hand control to distant relatives. Others assumed a group of wealthy investors would eventually take over. Instead, he announced his retirement and revealed that the future of the company would be placed in the hands of the one person who had earned his confidence through years of unwavering integrity. That person was Jason Brooks. It wasn't a reward for ambition or intelligence alone. It was recognition of a character that had remained unshaken through every challenge, temptation, and disappointment. For the first time in his life, Jason wasn't simply managing someone else's vision. He was entrusted with leading it. Jason embraced the responsibility with the same humility that had defined him from the very beginning. Under his leadership, the company entered new international markets, invested in innovative technology, and launched successful businesses across multiple industries. Revenue grew at a remarkable pace. Thousands of new jobs were created, and respected business publications began calling Jason one of the brightest entrepreneurial minds of his generation. Invitations to television interviews followed. His face appeared on the covers of leading business magazines. Investors competed for opportunities to work alongside him. Private jets replaced long-distance buses. A Rolls-Royce replaced the aging car he once struggled to keep running. Beautiful estates became places where he welcomed employees, partners, and charitable organizations rather than symbols of personal status. Yet despite the extraordinary transformation, Jason never forgot where his journey had begun or the people who had stood beside him when success still seemed impossible. Across America, people admired the billionaire whose story inspired millions, never realizing they had already heard his name years earlier under very different circumstances. Few could have imagined that the confident businessman appearing on television was the same young man who had quietly left town, carrying one worn suitcase and nothing but hope. Jason Brooks had become one of the country's newest billionaires, but the greatest chapter of his story was still waiting to unfold. Because somewhere in another city, one man and one woman were about to discover that the past they believed had disappeared forever was preparing to walk back into their lives. For years, Jason Brooks had avoided looking back. Every achievement, every business milestone, and every new opportunity had carried him farther from the painful memories he left behind. But there comes a moment when running from yesterday is no longer necessary. Sometimes the greatest test of success isn't how high you climb. It's whether you have the courage to face the people connected to your deepest wounds. That moment arrived quietly one afternoon when an invitation was placed on Jason's desk. It was for one of New York's most prestigious charity galas, attended by influential business leaders, philanthropists, and entrepreneurs from across the country. As Jason reviewed the guest list, one name immediately caught his attention: Jayden Brooks. For a few silent seconds, he simply stared at the page, knowing this invitation represented far more than another public appearance. Maria noticed the change in his expression and gently asked what was wrong. When Jason handed her the invitation, she immediately understood. Looking into his eyes, she softly said, "You don't have to go." Jason remained silent for a moment before calmly replying, "I'm not going because of revenge." Another brief pause followed before he quietly added, "I'm going because it's finally time." The following morning, a private jet lifted into the sky bound for New York. Waiting on the ground was a convoy led by Jason's Rolls-Royce, carrying him through the streets of Manhattan toward the charity gala that would change everything. Neither Jason nor Jayden knew exactly what would happen when they finally stood face to face again after all those years. But one thing was certain. The meeting that had been postponed by silence, sacrifice, and misunderstanding could no longer be avoided. The journey that began with one worn suitcase had brought Jason back to the very place where his past and present were about to collide, setting the stage for the unforgettable reunion that opened this story. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming everything they believed you never could. Jason Brooks never built his success to prove anyone wrong. He built it because he refused to let betrayal define the rest of his life. But now, after years of silence, one question remains. If you were Jason, would you finally tell Jayden Brooks the truth about Clara, or would you let the past remain buried forever? Share your thoughts in the comments below because I'd really love to know what you would do in his position. Before we end, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. And don't miss episode 3, because the reunion the entire business world is about to witness won't go the way anyone expects. One unexpected sentence spoken at the charity gala will expose years of hidden pain, unanswered questions, and a truth that could change the Brooks family forever.